The morning of my son's wedding, I stood in the coat room of the Roseau Lake Lodge with a borrowed lint roller in my hand, and I made myself breathe. Not because I was nervous for him, because I had just heard the woman he was about to marry call me, in a low, pleasant voice through a half open door, the old goose who's going to fund our entire life. I want to tell this properly, because I've turned it over so many times since. And I've decided the only way to keep it honest is to start at the beginning, the way my late husband used to start any difficult story. Slow. From the boots up, he'd say, "So, I'm 63. I was widowed at 58 when my husband had a heart attack shoveling the end of the driveway after a February storm. The wet, heavy snow we get up here in March, even when we should know better. He went down between the truck and the mailbox, and a neighbor found him. 41 years we'd been married. We started with a single produce stand on Highway 11 north of Gravenhurst, the kind of thing that's half farm stand and half prayer, and we built it over 4 decades into 11 garden centers and 2 greenhouse operations across central Ontario. People up here know the name. They bring their kids in May for the tomato seedlings. We did well. I won't pretend otherwise, because the money is the whole bone of this story, and I'd be a coward to dress it up. By the time my husband died, what we'd built, plus the cottages grandfather had bought on Lake Roseau back when you could buy lakefront for the price of a good truck, plus the house in town and the investments our accountant kept lecturing me about, all of it came to somewhere north of $8 million. Most of it not liquid, most of it land and inventory and a brand, but on paper, a number that makes people's eyes change when they hear it. My son was the only one who never let his eyes change. That's the part that still undoes me. He's a good boy. A man, I should say. He's 34, but he'll be my boy when he's 60. He never wanted the business. He went to school in Hamilton, became a physiotherapist, opened a little clinic, works on bad backs and torn up knees and the shoulders of old hockey players who can't admit they're old. He's gentle. He never asked me for $1 after the day he moved out at 22. When his father died, he drove up every weekend that whole first winter to help me with the books I didn't understand and the grief I understood too well, and he never once mentioned what any of it might one day be worth. I used to lie awake worrying that the world would eat a boy that soft. I just had the species wrong. I thought it would be a man. He met her 2 years ago. She came into his clinic with a running injury, or so the story went, and within a month he had that look I remembered on his father's face the night we met at a barn dance outside Bracebridge in 1981, the lit up look, the look that doesn't ask permission. She was lovely, I'll give her that. And I'm not being bitter. I'm being accurate, because the loveliness was part of the machinery. Bright, quick, the kind of woman who remembers your dog's name and your mother's maiden name and uses both at exactly the right moment. She called me by a pet name within 3 visits. She'd send me articles about gardening she'd clearly skimmed. When I had my knee done last spring, she drove up with soup. "Homemade," she said. It was from the Loblaws hot bar. I found the container in the recycling, and I told myself a kind woman doesn't have to cook, that judging her for soup was a small, ugly thing in me, the kind of thing widowed mothers do to the women who take their sons. So I shut the small, ugly thing up. I held the door for it and showed it out. God, I wish I'd listened to it. Her mother I met only a handful of times before the wedding. A woman about my age, very polished, the sort who has opinions about window treatments. She'd been through what she called a difficult divorce, and what her daughter called once, in a slip she covered quickly, the divorce that should have set us up and didn't. I noticed that. I noticed it, and I filed it under nothing because I am, or was, a person who gives people the benefit of every doubt I can find. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in September, up at the lodge on the lake, the leaves just starting to turn, the kind of postcard day Muskoka does without trying. 60 guests. My son had wanted small. She had wanted, I came to understand, a stage. We'd compromised at the lodge, which is small by some standards and a stage by any honest one. I'd offered to help with the costs, and she'd accepted before my son could open his mouth, and I'd told myself, again, that this was generosity and not a tell. The morning of, I drove up early with the boxes of boutonnières I'd insisted on doing myself, because my husband's mother had done the flowers at our wedding and it felt like a thread I could hold. The bridal party had taken the whole east wing. I parked. I carried my boxes in through the side, and I was looking for the coat room to set down the flowers and fix my hem when I heard her voice through the door that connects the coat room to the little parlor they were using to get ready. I want to be careful here, because I've replayed it so often I'm afraid of improving it in my memory, and I refuse to do that. I'll give you only what I'm sure of. Her mother said something I didn't catch, ending in, "And once the ring's on, she can't change the will out of spite. That's the whole point of doing it before." And my future daughter-in-law laughed, a relaxed, untroubled laugh, the laugh of someone who thinks the dangerous part is over, and said, "The old goose is going to fund our entire life. He's hopeless about her, he'll sign anything she puts in front of him, and she's hopeless about him. We just have to get through today smiling." And the mother said, "Just don't let him talk her into one of those marriage contracts. The minute lawyers get involved, it all gets carved up. Keep it warm and family, and she'll leave it open. 8 million more when she goes. You only have to be patient." And my future daughter-in-law said the thing that I will hear in the back of my skull until they put me in the ground beside my husband. She said, light as anything, "She won't last forever." And honestly, after the soup and the gardening articles and pretending to care about her dead husband's stupid produce stands, I've earned every cent. I did not gasp. I want you to know that. I'm not telling you that to brag, because there's nothing to brag about. I think the truth is that I'd gone somewhere very cold and very clear. The place you go when the floor drops out and your body decides, on its own, that this is not the moment to fall. I set my flower boxes down on the bench. My hands were steady. I noticed they were steady, the way you notice a stranger's hands. I stood in that coat room among 40 strangers' jackets, and I understood completely and at once 3 things. The first was that my son did not know. The relief of that, even in the middle of everything, was enormous. He was hopeless about her, she'd said. And I knew my boy, and I knew it was true. He loved her the uncomplicated way his father had loved me. And a man like that doesn't plan to bleed his own mother. He was the mark, same as I was. They weren't a couple plotting against me. They were a woman and her mother plotting against both of us and using the wedding as the lock on the door. The second thing I understood was that I had, on my phone, in my purse, on the bench beside the flowers, a voice memo running. I'd started it that morning in the car, talking through the order of the boutonnières to myself the way I do, because my husband used to tease me that I think out loud, and I'd never stuck it. I want to be honest that this was luck and not genius. I am not a genius. I am a woman who talks to herself and forgets to press stop. But I had it. I had every word. The third thing I understood was the timing. Her mother had said it plainly. Do it before. Get the ring on before the will gets locked down. They were racing a clock. They thought I couldn't see. The wedding was in 90 minutes. And the whole rotten plan depended on one thing being true, that I was sentimental and slow and would never, ever bring a lawyer into a family day. So I decided, standing in that coat room, that I would not be slow. I picked up my flowers. I carried them to the parlor. I knocked. I went in smiling, and I pinned a boutonnière on my son with my own hands, and I told my future daughter-in-law that she looked radiant, because she did, and because I needed her to believe the goose was still hopeless. She kissed my cheek, Her lipstick left a mark I could feel for an hour, like a small burn. Her mother told me my dress was a lovely color. I said thank you. I said I'd just slip out to make a few calls about the catering. And then I walked, at exactly the unhurried pace of a woman with nothing on her mind, out to my car, and I shut the door, and I sat there with my heart going like a trapped bird, and I called the only person I trusted with this on a Saturday morning. Our family lawyer is a woman named Diane, who handled my husband's estate and has been telling me for 5 years that my affairs were, in her words, a loaded gun pointed at your own grandchildren. She'd begged me for years to put the business and the cottage into a proper family trust, to update the will, to do the unromantic work, and every year I'd put it off, because doing it felt like admitting my husband was really gone, and the next thing to plan for was my own going. So the gun had stayed loaded. She was right. She's always right. She's always right, and she has the decency not to say so. She answered on the second ring because Diane is the kind of person who answers on the second ring. I told her where I was. I told her what I'd heard, almost word for word, and then I played her the memo through the phone, and there was a long silence on her end when it finished, and then she said, very quietly, "Margaret, don't sign anything today. Don't say anything to your son in there. Not yet. You'll lose your composure and they'll see it. Can you get away for 2 hours after the ceremony?" And I said the ceremony wasn't happening. She started to say something lawyerly and careful, and I stopped her. I told her I was not going to let my son say vows to a woman who'd called his dead father's life's work stupid produce stands while planning the slow theft of everything we'd built. I told her I was 63 and I buried a husband, and I knew exactly how short the warm family days were, and I was not going to spend mine being patient for someone else's benefit. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Okay, then here's what you do, and you do it in this order, and you do not improvise." And God bless her, she walked me through it like she was talking a person off a ledge, which I suppose she was, except the ledge was my whole future and she was talking me onto it. First she said, "The will and the trust." She had drafts. She'd had drafts ready for 2 years, gathering dust because I was a coward. She could not finalize a trust in 90 minutes. But she could, that very afternoon, witness and execute a new will that revoked the old one that left everything to my son outright, which meant everything to my son, and, by marriage, and the way these women clearly intended to play it, eventually to them, she would draft a new will leaving the business and the bulk of the estate not to my son outright, but into a trust for my son's benefit, with him as a beneficiary, but not the owner, professionally administered, with a clause that protected it absolutely from any spouse, present or future. In the event of a marriage breakdown, in Ontario, she reminded me, a marriage contract, what the Americans call a prenup, and a properly structured trust are not romantic, but they are how you keep a fortune from walking out the door inside someone else's suitcase. The mother had known exactly what to fear. She'd just bet I'd never reach for it. Second, the recording. Diane was careful here, lawyer to her bones. She told me that in Canada I was allowed to record a conversation I was part of, but this one I wasn't part of. I'd overheard it through a door. She told me, in the precise way she has, that the recording might not be something I could ever wave around in a courtroom, that I should not threaten anyone with it, should not post it, should not play it at the reception like a woman in a movie. But, she said, and here her voice changed, it didn't have to be evidence. It only had to be true. It only had to let me look my son in the eye and know, with no doubt at all, what I'd heard. And third, and this was the part that took the breath out of me because it was the part I'd been avoiding for 90 minutes. Third, I had to tell my son. Before the wedding. Myself. Not Diane, not a letter, not after. Me, and soon, and gently, and with the truth in my hand, whether he wanted it or not. I sat in that car for another minute. Through the windshield I could see the lake doing the thing it does in late September, going that hard pewter color. The docks empty, a single loon out past the point. My husband, proposed to me on that lake, we scattered half his ashes off the end of our dock, and I keep the other half because I can't decide, and he'd have laughed at me for it. I thought about the boy driving up every weekend that first winter to help me with books neither of us understood. And I got out of the car. I'll tell you the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the funeral, harder than the lawyer, harder than any of it. It was finding my son in the groom's room, half dressed, his tie undone, grinning at himself in the mirror with that lit up look, and watching the look go out. I asked the best man and his cousin to give us the room. My son knew something was wrong the second they left, because mothers can't hide it from the children they actually raised. I told him I needed him to listen to something and not say a word until it was finished, and that I loved him more than my own life, and that nothing he was about to hear was his fault. And then I played the memo. I have seen my son cry exactly 4 times the day his father died, twice as a small boy, and in that room, with the loon calling outside and the catering staff laughing down the hall, when he heard the woman he loved say she'd earned every cent of his dead father's stupid produce stands. He didn't rage. That's not who he is. He sat down on the little bench where his rented shoes were lined up, and he put his face in his hands, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 9, "Are you sure it's her, Mom? Could it be could you have?" And he couldn't finish it, because he could hear it was her. We both could. There's no mistaking the voice of someone you love saying, "She's only ever wanted what you'll leave behind." I told him the truth, which was that I wasn't sure of anything except what I'd heard, and that the choice was his and not mine, that he was a grown man, and I would stand behind whatever he decided. Even if he decided to marry her with his eyes open, I'd have hated it, but I'd have stood there. I told him I had a lawyer on the phone, and a way to protect us both, no matter what he chose. And I told him the thing I'd come to in the car, the thing that turned out to be the heart of all of it. More than the 8 million, more than the wedding, more than the soup. I told him, it's not the money I can't forgive. It's that she was patient about my dying. She was counting on it. She built a whole future on the idea that the kindest thing I could do was hurry up and be gone. He looked at me for a long time. Then he stood up, and he buttoned his shirt back up the wrong way and didn't notice. And he said, "I want to hear her say it isn't true." So we went to find her. I won't dress up what happened in that parlor, because the truth is plainer and stranger than anything I could invent. My son didn't shout. He's not built for it. He asked her very calmly, holding his own wedding tie in his hand, like he'd forgotten it was there, whether she loved him. She said of course, and reached for him and called him the pet name, and he asked her just as calmly what she'd meant by "she won't last forever." And I watched a thing happen in a human face that I hope I never see again. I watched her run, in the space of about 4 seconds, through every available lie, test each one, and find them all already dead. Because she could see he knew. She didn't know how, and she never found out for me, but she could see the knowing in him. And a person like that, when the warm family cover is blown, has nothing underneath. No fury even. Just calculation, recalculating. The first thing out of her mouth was not, "I'm sorry," or "I love you." It was, "Who told you that? Was it her?" Looking at me. The old goose. And her mother. And this is the part the neighbors up here still won't quite believe. Her mother stood up smoothing her skirt and said, "To me, woman to woman, almost reasonable. Margaret, let's not do this here. There are 60 people. Let's get through the day and sort the details after." As if the details were a seating chart. As if I would still, even now, choose the warm family appearance over the truth. She had read me right for 2 years. She'd just read me a sentence too long. I said no. I said there wasn't going to be a wedding, and there wasn't going to be a sorting out after, and that the 60 people could be told the truth or a kind fiction, I didn't care which. but my son would not be marrying her daughter today or ever. And then I did the only theatrical thing I did that whole day, the only thing I'd take back if I were a better woman, except I'm not sure I would. I told them both that my new will would be signed before sundown, that the estate was going into a trust their daughter would never touch with both hands, and a court order, and that the patient waiting they built their lives around had just turned into the longest wait in the world, because I planned, out of sheer spite and excellent genetics, to live to 103. We told the guests there'd been a family emergency, which there had. We sent them home with the food, because $8 million or not, you don't waste a whole lodge's worth of catering, and my husband would have haunted me. My son walked the bride and her mother to their car himself, which I didn't ask him to do, and which told me everything about the man I'd raised. That even broken open, he wouldn't let them be hauled out. He'd see them off with the last dignity he had to give, because that's the difference between people who love and people who calculate. And he was never going to be the second kind, no matter who he married. Diane came up that afternoon with a paralegal and a witness and the documents in a banker's box. We signed the new will at my kitchen table in town with the maple turning gold outside the window. The following month she finally built the trust she'd been begging me to build for 5 years. The unromantic work, the loaded gun finally pointed somewhere safe. The business, the cottage, all of it, locked down for my son and the children he might one day have, protected from any spouse who might someday try the patient game again. It cost a great deal in fees and a great deal more in the thing I've been protecting myself from, which was admitting that I am going to die and that love alone does not keep a family safe. Love is necessary. It is not sufficient. You need love, and you need a lawyer, and you need to listen to the small, ugly voice that tells you the soup came from the hot bar. I learned later, small towns, you always learn later, that the mother had done a version of this before, the difficult divorce that should have set them up, a pattern. I think about the other families. I didn't sue anyone. Diane was right that the recording was a muddy thing legally, and I had no appetite for years in a courtroom feeding lawyers more of what I'd built. I just closed the door and locked it and walked away with everyone I love still standing, which it turns out is what winning actually looks like. And it's quieter than you'd think. My son moved back up north for a while into the cottage, and we had a strange and gentle winter, the two of us, the way we'd had a strange and gentle winter 5 years before. He's all right now. Better than all right, though I won't tempt fate by saying more. He has the lit up look back for someone new, and this time I watch with both eyes open, and I keep my small, ugly voice on a comfortable chair right beside me. And so far, she has nothing bad to say. People ask me, when they hear a piece of this, whether I regret blowing up a wedding in front of 60 people, the dress and the flowers and the loon on the lake, and I tell them the truth, which is the only thing I have left to give freely. Stopping a wedding isn't the cruel thing. Letting your child say forever to someone who's already started spending the years you have left. That's the cruel thing. And it wears a beautiful dress, and it brings you soup, and it calls you by a sweet name, and it waits. I'm 63. I intend, out of love and out of spite in roughly equal parts, to make every one of them wait a very long time. For 2 years I told myself that the small, ugly voice in me, the one that noticed the soup came from the Loblaws hot bar, was just a widow being unkind to the woman who took her son. I taught myself to ignore it, and ignoring it almost cost me everything, because the bride and her mother had read me exactly right. A sentimental woman who'd rather keep a warm family appearance than ask a hard question. That was the whole machinery of their plan. They didn't fail because they were stupid. They failed because they said one sentence too many, and because the cold, clear part of me finally stopped apologizing for existing. I've thought a lot about why it ended the way it did, and I keep landing on the same plain truth. What you build out of who you are, day after day, long before the test ever comes. My son walked the two of them to their car with the last dignity he had to give, even broken open, because he'd spent 34 years being a person who doesn't kick people when they're down. And that decency was always going to be stronger than anyone's plan to use it against him. I was able to act in 90 minutes because I'd spent 40 years actually understanding the business I pretended I didn't. So when the floor dropped out, I knew exactly what was worth protecting and exactly who to call. Diane could finish in an afternoon what I'd avoided for 5 years only because she'd done the unromantic homework I kept refusing to do. So here is what I'd tell you if you were sitting at my kitchen table with the maple going gold outside the window. Be the kind of person who keeps their word and sees people off with grace even when they don't deserve it, because that is the only thing that's still standing when the dress and the flowers and the 8 million all fall away. But don't mistake softness for goodness. Goodness without a clear head is just a door left unlocked. Pay attention. Listen to the small voice that notices the soup. Learn the dull, unromantic facts of your own life, your will, your accounts, the difference between leaving something open and locking it down. Because love is necessary and it is never ever sufficient. And when the moment comes, as it came for me in that coat room, find the backbone to act while there's still time to act, instead of waiting for the warm family day to be over. I'm 63. I lost my husband between the truck and the mailbox on a March morning, and I learned how short the warm days really are. The bride bet her whole future on my dying soon and quietly. The last thing I did for my son was decide, out of love and out of pure stubborn spite, to make every one of them wait a very long time.